Now, it's been more than a week since the fallout from an anti-tariff ad that was released by the Ontario government brought an end to trade talks between Canada and the US. And it's still unclear whether Trump's threatened 10% tariffs on Canadian goods will go ahead. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was asked about this on CNN's State of the Union today.
The 10% tariff has not been enacted, and it might not be enacted.
We'll see. I do think it was a big setback for the Canadian government, and this Premier of Ontario should be ashamed. He's probably still smarting from the Blue Jays' loss last night.
Now, Prime Minister Mar Carney says he apologized to Trump for the ad, saying he disagreed with Ontario's Premier Doug Ford about airing it. But Trump has called off all trade talks with Canada, and it's unclear if and when talks could take place in the future. For more on all of this, let's now bring in CTV News political commentator and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair in the conversation. Tom, great to see you this Sunday afternoon. Thank you for your time. Lots to catch up on, so let's start with Prime Minister's trip to Asia, attending ASEAN, APEC, and pledging to transform Canada's economy as he engaged with these large economic groups. What did the Prime Minister achieve, you think, Tom?
Well, actually, I think that you're right to put those two together. His trips, of course, were part of a pattern of meetings that are held annually. Canada's place there has been earned over the years. We have trade deal with many of those countries in the Asia-Pacific region, and we're considered reliable partners by most. And at the same time, Carney is trying to signal to the Americans that we have other options around the world. I think that Canada is starting to realize that overall we made a mistake in putting ourselves in lockstep with the Americans. You put all your eggs in one basket, and then you have a Trump who just decides to throw the basket on the floor, then you're in trouble. And that's where we are right now. So I think that Carney is showing the depth of his connection around the world, his experience, the respect that people have for him. That works out very well in Canada's favor. He's also signaling to the Americans that we're going to get closer to China. Now, I think that one of the first things that will happen is that Canada will start lifting the ridiculous 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. That's something that we did to please the Americans almost exactly a year ago. And the Americans were putting 100% tariffs to try to squeeze the Chinese out of the electric vehicle market. All of a sudden, this favor to the Americans got us nothing but grief and tariffs and punch in the head from Donald Trump's regime. So Canada is simply saying, look, if you're going to play the game that way, then we do have other options. Anita Anand went to India recently, and even though she's a minister and not a prime minister, she got a meeting with Prime Minister Modi. And I think that was another way of signaling that Canada's relation with India is getting back on the rails after some very tough times.
Indeed, those two are, of course, biggest economies there in Asia, and Canada doing its best to have those relations back up with them. But I want to talk about some things back in the country as well. Let's talk about the budget now, Tom, that will be tabled by the government this week. Carney, of course, saying he is willing to fight an election over it. How likely is that? And does the Prime Minister really have the votes he needs?
I think it's very unlikely, because, of course, the NDP would be somewhat suicidal if they were to contrive to provoke an election at a time when they don't even have a permanent leader and they only have 7 MPs. But stranger things have happened in politics. You might recall that 3 of the members of that 7-member caucus, who described themselves as 3 racialized women, Jenny Kwan of Vancouver, Leah Gazan of Winnipeg, and, of course, MP Idlout of I was going to say the Northwest Territories, but she's in Iqaluit, and she is the type of person, along with the other 2, who would be willing to perhaps send a signal that they don't rely on the rest of the members of that caucus to determine for them what they're going to do. Carney has decided that he's going to separate out the operating budget, in other words, the day-to-day administration of the government, and what Bill Morneau was describing in the clip just before we had a chance to talk, Akshay, when he was saying, we had this massive project for an oil pipeline to the west, and it's starting to prove that it was worthwhile. That type of investment would be a separate thing. So what Carney's going to be concentrating on when he talks to people is saying, look at the operating budget of the government. I'm going to start shrinking down. We're into a period of austerity with regard to government spending. Now, that does become tricky for the NDP. Because even though there are going to be things in there like the continuation of the dental program, for example, and perhaps more money for school lunch programs, that type of thing, if the NDP is getting the clear signal from Mar Carney that he's going to shrink the size of the civil service, go after the members of the civil service unions who have always been very close to the NDP, then there might be a cause to vote against the budget. So stay tuned. Anything could happen. But my overall thinking on this, Akshay, is that we will see the budget get approved, because I don't think anybody's got the stomach for a fight in an election right now.
But then who supports the Liberals?
Well, right now, of course, the Liberals are going to be alone vis-a-vis the opposition, the official opposition Conservatives, even though they're wise to not say in advance that they're voting against something they haven't seen. That's just logical politics. They're going to vote against it. I'll announce that for you. The Bloc Québécois is going to announce against it because they had non-negotiable conditions, don't you know? And so, you know, overall, who cares what the Bloc says? But they do have a number of seats, 19 from memory. And so that really does leave it up to the NDP to determine. Elizabeth May could very well vote against the budget, although I'm not sure that she wants to be in an election anytime soon. She's back to a party of one. So it really is up to those 7 members of the NDP.
Right.
And I think that Canada, you know, better pay attention to them. I also think that they're pretty smart folks, and they know that none of them won in a landslide, and even those 7 seats would be in play if ever there was an election.
Right. And briefly, Tom, if you could weigh in on this anti-tariff ad. I mean, of course, the Prime Minister said he apologized to President Trump. How much of a hit has that taken to that One Canada approach now?
Well, it was a bit of a mess because at the beginning, of course, Carney suggested that it was a bad idea on the part of Premier Ford of Ontario. Ford shot back that Carney and his chief of staff had seen the ad. Now, Carney didn't answer that for a few days. And then finally, Carney said, yes, I saw it. And I told him it was a bad idea. Ford has had no comeback on that. In the first place, politically, what a terrible mess for Canada to be in, to have the Premier of Canada's largest province fighting with the Prime Minister of Canada when everybody's been talking about the Team Canada approach. It's been a mess, and Ford should have known better. Now we're going to find out whether David Eby of British Columbia is going to do the same stupid thing, start provoking the Americans. Actually, we went through a commission of inquiry in Canada into foreign interference in Canadian elections. Now, it'd be impossible for me to have enough time to explain it to you, my absolute opposition to most of Trump's tariffs and his approach to things. But I do think that the Americans have a point when they say, look, what are you doing sticking your nose in our internal affairs? We don't like it when other countries stick their nose in our affairs, and I think that we better learn that what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander and have a little bit of modesty. Even though we like poking the bear, we are sticking our nose in American affairs, and I don't think it's the right thing to do. And I think that Mr. Carney was right to apologize to Trump. He didn't try to deny that he had apologized when Trump talked about it, and he explained why, that it's hurt Canada. And so, yeah, the insult to injury, of course, is to hear Scott Bessent throwing even the Blue Jays into the mix today. But, you know, we'll get past that sort of childish behavior on both sides. And I think we'll be able to sit down. There's no negotiation right now, but they are still talking, whatever they want to call those talks. So I think we're moving along faster than anybody wants to admit.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. CTV News political commentator Tom Mulcair, always a pleasure. Thanks, Tom.
All the best.